As this is our 100th episode, we're going to forego our usual deep dive and tell you some, well, of our origin story. What got us into cinema? Well, we're old enough to remember a day when there wasn't streaming services, a day before home viewing, a day when you had to go out, literally leave the house and go to your favourite picture house. I grew up in Sheffield, Andy grew up in Liverpool, but I'm sure part of our FilmFile story is knowing where we saw those films. Andy, have you got a memory of going to the cinema for the very first time and where you saw that film?
Well, from the very first time, I was getting taken to the cinema by my mum frequently from a very early age. But the one it's my earliest childhood memory. It wasn't actually back in Liverpool.
Okay.
It was nowhere near there. It was down in London.
Right.
Because we were staying with relatives at the back end of 1977 for Christmas to New Year. And my mum, being the big film fan and sci-fi geek that she is, knew of a little film called Star Wars that was getting released in London before it went into general UK distribution a month later.
Those were the days.
And so whilst we were down there, we went to the West End of London to watch Star Wars. I was aged 4, and it's my earliest childhood memory. And that is the point at which I was impacted immensely with film. That film is the reason why I'm passionate about film, because everything about it captivated my young mind. The look, the style, the music, everything. And what I am today has all stemmed from that one defining moment. But generally, when we were back home, the small town that we live at on the outskirts of Liverpool, we were closer to the town of St. Helens, where it was the St. Helens ABC, which was our usual haunt. And we used to line up around the block in that way that you used to in those olden days.
Indeed.
And you'd literally go all the way around the block. And it was one of those 3-screen cinemas where it's got one great big grand screen with smoking on the left, non-smoking on the right. A little lounge area before that screen to settle in before you can get allowed in. And then 2 little box screens downstairs where junk, such as Empire of the Ants, which I got took to see, would play. And I have loads of fond memories of a multitude of films watching there. Your Supermans, your E.T.s, all the films, even Police Academy. Not the first one because I wasn't old enough, but the second one was a more age-friendly film. And I got to see that there. And I've got so many memories of good and bad films. We saw the Village People movie at the ABC St. Helens.
Good Lord.
And yeah, my mum subjected us to everything. But I also got to see things like Grease, which I absolutely lapped up and loved. And it helped because my mum was not just catering to me with my sci-fi and geeky tastes, but I've got 2 older sisters that my mum had to cater for them as well. So I got to see a diverse range of films. And I think that benefited me, because I didn't get trapped into it's got to be action and spectacle. I got to embrace film at a very early age in all its different forms.
I'm with you on Star Wars. That was the film that got the sort of juices running to have some kind of industry connection to cinema. And I saw that at the Gaumont Cinema, which is sadly gone now in Sheffield, which was a bit like you. They had one massive, beautiful screen, an oldie-styley auditorium, and I saw so much there. And had a small box screen where I remember seeing things like Nosferatu, the Wim Wenders version, on a double bill. Remember double bills with Ralph Bakshi's Wizards? And I went to see Wizards because the animated film and Nosferatu was playing, and I think I left enjoying Nosferatu much more. But yeah, I mean, cinema was in my blood. My parents took me from being very, very young. I think my earliest memory would have been going to the Odeon in Barkerspool, Sheffield, to see Thunderbirds Are Go. Yeah, it was Thunderbirds Are Go, and I would have been must have been about 3 or 4, and been blown away. And I remember that. But my mum was great, a bit like yours, for taking my younger sister and I to see all the Disney movies. We went to see as much as possible, and there was a time when my parents used to park me and my sister in the cinema, then go and do shopping, and left us to it, even at a young age, which now all sorts of laws would have been broken. But we saw all the classic Disney animated films. My mum would take us on a regular basis. and then when I got a little bit older, would make the journey on my own. Much more braver than a lot of kids now would have been, and I went and sat in silence and was overawed. It was my church, it really was. So the outstanding cinemas were the Gaumont, the ABC. I did try the ABC Miners Club, and I hated it. Where you'd get a cartoon, you'd get a serial. You get one of the black and white Universal RKO Universal serials. But I hated them because they were too noisy. And I've always been that thing about wanting to enjoy my films with the silence of being able to hear it. I hate people, absolutely detest people talking in a movie. It's my huge pet peeve. And I didn't enjoy them even at that young age. I wanted to sit there and absorb these beautiful images in front of me, whatever the film is. But yeah, a bit like you for the ABC, I saw Superman there, went straight from school because my school finished early. Star Trek the Motion Picture there, Lethal Weapon. Fantastic. They were two very, very beautiful cinemas, sadly both gone. There was a Flea Pit cinema in Sheffield. There was, a couple of Flea Pit cinemas in Sheffield. The Classic, and that used to show second run movies. That's where I saw 1941. And my dad accidentally took me to see a soft porn movie because it played double bill with a kung fu movie. We'd gone to see the kung fu movie, and we were sticking around, and it was my first introduction to boobs. And I remember my dad being quite embarrassed, going, "Do you want to leave?" And I'm going, "No, I think we'll stay." We had the Studio 5, 6, and 7 in Sheffield, which were notorious cinema. A lot of adult films or softcore pornography. But you'd sometimes get the second run. I remember seeing, a Michael Cimino film. His name escapes me. Mickey Rourke, Michael Cimino. It was kind of the follow-up to Deer Hunter.
Year of the Dragon.
Year of the Dragon. Where I saw Year of the Dragon. And then we had The Anvil, which again was one of those cinemas where you had all the reruns. So if you missed it first time around, you got to see it there. And I missed Raiders of the Lost Ark the first time around. I saw it on a rerun cinema. So there was some beautiful cinemas. I mean, you used to have one cinema chain which was would show one kind of movie from one distributor, like Warner's and the like, and then the other one which would show things for Fox and Universal. It was weird back then. The cinemas that we have now basically show everything, and you used to have an allegiance. You had one favorite cinema clearly as over the other one, but you'd go to where they were showing the movies that you wanted to see rather than just turn up at your cinema, for instance, and go, "I want to see that," or see that, or see that. But they were fantastic. It was a fantastic experience going to the cinema.
Yeah. When I was in the early teens, the Showcase Cinema in Liverpool was built, and this was the first introduction in Liverpool to having a multiplex cinema, an American-styled multiplex cinema. And I think it was 12 screens, 6 down one corridor, 6 down the other, in what was their standard format layout for a Showcase Cinema. And that became the haunt for me and my mates from school as we started to go to see films without a parent or guardian. And the most defined, we saw Highlander 2 there. We saw like a range of like our usual passions. But the one that stands out for me is I got to see Terminator 2 Judgment Day on its opening day, the very first show, and got a free T-shirt as a result.
I remember you telling that story.
It sticks in my mind because the T-shirt was a kid's size and we were all over 15. And it was just like, why are you giving away kids' T-shirts to a film that is rated not for kids? And the poor soul who I was moaning and having a go at, I just feel so sorry for. And I said it then when I last regaled people with this story. If you are listening out there and you remember some absolute knobhead with long hair and a leather jacket giving you lip about you giving me a small shirt, I'm really sorry. I understand that you have no control over it now. I understand now I work within the industry. And if I scarred you for life, please get in touch and I'll recompense you in one way, shape or form. But no, the Showcase was my first introduction to the multiplex experience where all of a sudden the sound wow, we suddenly had sound all around us, surround sound speakers, and the crispness
Yeah.
of the projection. And when I moved to Sheffield and made this my home, at first I only thought that the Odeon was a thing, but then I discovered that there was a Warner's cinema out in Meadowhall, and that became the place for me to go, right up until the back end of the 90s when Virgin opened their big 20-screen megaplex, which is now the Cineworld, after going through UGC when I started working there, and then moving on to Cineworld. Obviously now, my haunt of choice has to be the Light Cinema in Sheffield, because not only is it the coziest cinema around, it doesn't feel like a chain cinema. It feels like an indie cinema. It's got a manager there who's so passionate about film, and he
I
would
wonder who
talk
that
to
is.
anyone about love of film. But no, even before I started working there, when I first went to the Light, I loved the aesthetic of it, and I loved the nature of the reclining seats, and it's a film lovers cinema, whereas Cineworld has become an entertainment cinema.
Yeah, and I think that's reflected in the kind of audiences that you get at either cinema, really. Nothing to decry or take anything away from either, but
some people want just the thrill and the thrill, the different effects, the 3D, the shaky chairs, etc. That's fine if that's your bag. Cineworld caters beautifully for that. It gives you all the bells and whistles of entertainment.
And I've got to thank Cineworld for being so generous in their times. I don't have the relationship I used to have with them, but they were incredibly generous. And I had my 40th birthday party at the Cineworld in Sheffield, and had a screening of my own favourite film. So just the experience of sitting in the cinema, I still get. I never take it for granted, Andy, even after. I've been so honoured to be able to see films ahead of schedule. In the old days, weeks ahead of schedule. Being able to meet people connected to cinema, but I never take it for granted. I love the experience, and it's still an experience. And I kind of glibly said it's my church, but it is. Cinema is my church. It's where I go and worship this art form that I've made so many good friends out of, and constantly gives something back into my life on a regular basis.
It was through cinemas that we got to know each other.
Absolutely.
You were a regular attendee at the press shows that we used to run.
I miss press shows. Though.
I
do miss press shows.
I would either be working or would try and make myself available to go into the press shows. And we just got it was just from the little 5-minute chats with me, you, and usually Tony Earnshaw. Afterwards, that we just discuss our initial thoughts on the films before going on our separate ways. And then over time, we just built up that rapport.
Yeah, absolutely. The press shows have sort of dissolved and disappeared unless you live in the capital, where you can
London.
Get to see movies on prior to release. But it doesn't happen. Before, you could sometimes be a month in advance. When I used to write for magazines, that's how I got my initial press pass. I was a film reviewer for a magazine, and started, and just being able to have the time to write up a story and then get it printed in within a week, which you've got a movie that launches on a Thursday or a Friday, and you either have to now have the time to go to a screening first thing, or just hope that you can catch some sort of pre-show version of it. It's much harder to be able to do. I wouldn't be able to do the shows that I used to do for the BBC the way that I couldn't possibly do it anymore. Not at all. I think that's the only disappointing side of the way that cinema's gone. That you don't have that build up to it, a good couple of days to be able to get into it.
Yeah, it's all last minute with the critics' releases now.
Yeah, and it's to some extent. I don't think the cinema industry needs critics anymore, or just doesn't rely on them as much as we did. I mean, I'm never say I've ever broken a film, but I know I've generated interest in films by having a mass audience to be able to talk about it.